This show is a Hopful Media podcast production.
You are listening to the History of Persia podcast. And as we've been hearing from Trevor, the history of the Persian Empire is a story of Persian domination of much of the Middle East and Central Asia. But this was not the first time these lands were conquered, and it would certainly not be the last. I don't want to give too much away, but in the year 329 BCE, the important Persian city of Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan was conquered by some guy by the name of Alexander. But what's interesting about this city is that about 1700 years later, this same city, Samarkand, would be the glowing capital of an empire forged by a man known as Timur, or Tamerlane, or simply Timur. And Timur has gone down in history as a fantastic tactician, a man who supposedly never lost a battle, a great patron of the arts, and one of the most brutal conquerors of all time. From about 1365 until 1405 CE, Timur was almost constantly at war, building for himself an empire that stretched from modern-day Turkey to India, from Syria to the Russian steppe, and I want to know how and why this happened. If that sounds interesting to you and you want the story of Timur told by a guy who talks too fast and has loud neighbors, then check out my show, The Timur Podcast. Find out more about it at timurpodcast.com or listen to it in most places where you find podcasts. And with that said, take it away, Trevor.
If you're listening to this, you probably know that the United States of America gets involved in a lot of foreign wars. We all know the big ones: World War I, World War II, Korea, sort of, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again. But before and in between all that, the story a lot of us heard in school is that the US military didn't get out much. Turns out, that's kind of a blatant lie. I'm gonna guess a lot of us don't know about the multiple Spanish-American wars, the wars that led up to the Battle of Little Bighorn, or the baffling number of times we invaded Mexico. Odds are you've never even heard of things like the time the Marines invaded Taiwan or the Oconee Wars. I'm Trevor Cully, host of the new podcast America Secret Wars, where I am going to sit down with a guest in each episode and dive into the history of all the forgotten and overlooked times that the United States deployed military force against other nations. You can find America Secret Wars at secretwarspod.com on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Hello everyone, this is Trevor Cully, and welcome to yet another Hopful Media announcement. So, I've got big news, and I've got updates. If you want to figure out all that stuff for yourself, go to hopfulmedia.com, historyofpersiapodcast.com, or secretwarspod.com, which are all the same website now. And click on the brand new support tab. If you are on Patreon, a second announcement should appear in your feed tomorrow to explain the Patreon-specific details, so you can wait until then to hear all of this stuff if you want, but there is a mini episode at the end. For everyone else, updates first. If you're starting to miss the history of Persia narrative, good news, I am on track to return with episode 126 around July 15th. The last non-standard episode before that will feature a guest appearance from Derek of the Hellenistic Age podcast to explain what the Hellenistic Age is, so we know what to look for in the foreseeable future. The wonky ad inserts in the first half of History of Persia have also been fixed, finally. So if you skipped those old episodes because the ads came in at random times and overlapped with one another, you can safely go back and listen from the beginning, not ad-free, but at least with ads in the nice, predictable places. On the America Secret Wars side of things, the new show is now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the big platforms. Both shows are now on YouTube, on the Hopful Media YouTube channel, and you can find a link to that in the episode description. If my more conversational, rated R podcast about the forgotten and overlooked stories of American military history sounds interesting, please, please, please subscribe over on the main feed for that show. I'm going to post one more episode of Secret Wars in the History of Persia feed to remind everyone, and then it will be trailers for longer mini-series within Secret Wars. Likewise, I'll probably cross-promote big events with a trailer episode for History of Persia on the Secret Wars feed as well, but because it's an ongoing narrative, I'm still kinda working out how best to do that. And if you are a History of Persia listener who finds that America Secret Wars just isn't for you, I fully expected that to be the case, but I would be very grateful if you recommended it to somebody who does listen to more podcasts in that conversational comedy style. If it does interest you, by the time this posts, I will be in the midst of the first Secret Wars miniseries on the colonial wars we fought in Eastern Asia. But maybe you hate advertising, whether they're working properly or not. Maybe you want to buy History of Persia merch, but the launch cart store is a cluttered nightmare. Maybe you all just love me so much that you want to hear more of my voice twice a month. Fear not. You can get all that and more by subscribing to a Hopful Media membership at hopfulmedia.com.co. hopfulmedia.com.co. Or head to the support tab at hopfulmedia.com. That's right. After 5 years, I am moving away from Patreon and consolidating merchandise, subscriptions, and one-off donations all under one roof. Just click on one of the several links now on the regular website homepage. That said, this is not actually as indie as it sounds. I quite simply don't have the expertise, or I suspect the trust, to set that up. All of the back end here is powered by a company called fourthwall.com. So it's not like you're just giving me your credit card. There is a full company with traditional payment systems in place and all of the financial details and programming that I just don't really understand in e-commerce. But Fourth Wall does offer some really useful features for me that Patreon just doesn't. If you are already on Patreon, I am not closing the Patreon page. If you would prefer to sign up through Patreon because it's already a website everyone's familiar with, I'm not closing that page. I would prefer if you made the switch for reasons I'll explain in a moment, but I know Patreon is a popular platform and not everyone wants a 37th different streaming service. To accommodate that, I will be posting instructions on Patreon to join the new platform at the same tier without canceling your subscription or paying extra money. To encourage people to join Hopful Media Max Plus Premium Cockflix, one of the reasons I'm excited to make the switch is that I am able to offer a promotional rate for new subscribers. Alright, I'm gonna pause for a second and let you pull over, get your notes app or a pen out, and listen closely. New subscribers at hopfulmedia.com.co from now until the end of July 2024 will get their first month for free using code ALEXANDER. All caps, ALEXANDER. If you sign up for an annual subscription and you pay for the whole year up front, you will get your first 2 months for free using code GIZISTAG. All caps GIZISTAG. These codes will be in the description for this episode. So, if you want to ditch the advertising, you can sign up for just $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to 4 years of monthly bonus episodes. Higher tiers get more benefits like discounted merch, and access to a brand new Hopful Media Discord server, which is still in an experimental stage while I gauge interest in it. So what exactly are the features that convinced me to ditch a platform I have had success on for years? At least partly ditch? Number 1 is plain and simple. Patreon fees are brutal, especially if you want to offer a $1 tier. But any subscription at all is more than I get from any one listener through ads by several orders of magnitude. I want to reflect that in my subscriptions. Even at just $1, you are more than paying for what I make in ads if you continue to listen to the regular feed. Plus, if everyone who listens to this just went and pledged $1 a month, I'd be able to quit my day job and hire a full-time producer. Just saying, guys. Number 2 is logistics. Patreon is popular with podcasters, but their actual support for podcasts is mediocre at best. They don't have any way at all to offer multiple separate subscriber feeds if you, say, host 2 different podcasts. I don't want to ask people to pay me twice to get the benefits for both History of Persia and America's Secret Wars. Especially at that ad-free tier, because again, $1 pays for like 1,000 ads. Fourth Wall lets me assign each tier as many separate RSS feeds as I want. So you subscribe and get the subscriber version of both shows as their own separate podcasts. Number 3 is that Fourth Wall doubles as a public-facing store, and I get much more control over the web design this way. So it will also be the new home to History of Persia merch, and the first simple Secret Wars merch should be out by the time you hear this. I finally have some designs out there that are getting ready to have a second round of merch later this year. Alright, this was the most direct please give me money episode that we have had in a while. And I promised a long time ago that I never wanted to do that without also giving you a bit of content before the end. The thing is, I am out of Persian coinage to talk about for the moment, and I'm not likely to stop making announcements. Plus, this one is cross-posting to both podcasts, and talking about Seleucid coins or something wouldn't make a ton of sense for a modern history show anyway. So instead, after some ads, I'm gonna talk about gold, and why and how it was valuable, from the Lydian Cresid down all the way to the gold standard.
In his final days, Alexander the Great's generals asked him who should succeed him. Alexander's answer, the strongest. Taken literally, this would see the close of the classical Greek age, an age thousands of years in the making. Join me, Mark Selleck, as I go back to retell the story of ancient Greece, in my series Casting Through Ancient Greece. We will cast our way back to its beginnings, all the way through to the spread of its culture throughout the known world, thanks to Alexander and his generals. You can listen and subscribe to the series at www.castingthroughancientgreece.com, or you can listen on your favourite podcasting platform. Don't forget to follow the series over on Twitter at Casting Greece, or on Facebook at Casting Through Ancient Greece. I look forward to seeing you there.
So, just physically and chemically, gold is actually a pretty amazing element. It is so malleable that modern techniques have stretched pure gold into a wire the width of a single atom. Simultaneously, it has a melting point over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and it's very heavy. Heavy means that 4 billion years ago, when the Earth first formed, most of the gold in that giant cloud of space dust that compacted to form our planet sunk to the Earth's core. Simultaneously, gold is relatively easy to find on the Earth's surface or just below it. And one of the most common hypotheses to explain that discrepancy is that most of the gold we have actually came from meteor impacts after the planet had already formed. Of course, this is all stuff we've defined through very modern science, but both aspects here are important to explain the history of gold and human beings. It means that gold is easy to access on the surface, and historically it was even more accessible. Being incredibly malleable, it's very easy stuff to work with and shape even without heating it up. That means, in times and places when you just couldn't bring gold up to its high melting point, they could still heat and bend it or just hammer it into shape. Plus, there's the aesthetic value. With a shiny yellow metallic appearance, gold is almost unique in nature and has a lot of the characteristics that appeal to our baser instincts. Go outside and look at nature. Life on our planet has evolved to notice bright, shiny colors, both as warning signs and as something to be attracted to depending on circumstance. That's why crows steal jewelry, why flowers look pretty, and why a lot of animals have big, bright patterns when they want to attract a mate. Humans, obviously, are not exempt from this, and by at least 40,000 years ago, our ancestors started tinkering with gold. Of course, even with all its unique characteristics, there's not a lot you can do with the very small amounts of gold that were actually visible on the surface in the Paleolithic period. They weren't usually big enough to make much out of them, and building a large and hot enough fire to melt a bunch of little pieces into one whole just wasn't a priority or possible during an Ice Age glacial advance. But my point is that people have basically always taken notice of the stuff whenever we found it. Fast forward to 4000 BC, in modern Bulgaria's Varga necropolis, and you get the first golden artifacts that can be reliably dated. That doesn't mean they were the first gold baubles that humans ever made, or even the oldest ones we've ever found, just that they're the ones with the earliest date that archaeologists can confidently assign to gold working. In fact, although they are mostly undecorated, the gold jewelry found at Varga is pretty delicate and complex craftsmanship, which means their goldsmiths had practice. Thing is, if we go back to that whole sank to the Earth's core and returned through meteors idea, even though it's accessible, gold is pretty rare. So once people could melt it down, we started recycling it. This is something you see with most valuable metals in history. Gold, silver, bronze, whichever. If you need more of it for something, you could always take the stuff that's already floating around and melt it down and shape it into something new. That was the fate of a lot of ancient statues, jewelry, and coinage. At least 25% of the gold in circulation today is recycled, and odds are that the real figure is much higher. Unless you can trace it directly back to a specific mine, there's good chance that any gold you own was recycled at some point, and potentially mined originally in a very long time ago. So now we've got a rare, aesthetically pleasing material, but until pretty recently, gold didn't have much practical use. Today, we recognize it for being an incredible conductor of heat and electricity, medical uses for microscopic particles in colloidal suspension, and its ability to reflect some forms of radiation. All of those are pretty modern applications. It's soft and malleable, so no good for making tools or building with it. It's easy to work with compared to tougher materials, but that doesn't do you any good if you don't have spare time to make things look extra pretty. So gold didn't start circulating en masse until agriculture paved the way for food surplus that created room for new classes of people who could focus on recreational, non-essential activities. Then it became a rare, aesthetically pleasing material that the people with the most time and resources to burn could play with. That's when gold became valuable. It was, as it still is, a sign of disposable wealth by the end of the Stone Age. Of course, once it became valuable, there was a reason to find more of it, which meant more gold entered circulation over the centuries as people started mining it more and more often. And as gold became more common, people tried more things with it. Like alloying it to silver to make different colors, another precious metal with a lot of the same traits. This produced electrum. Sometimes that occurs naturally, other times we have to do it ourselves, and the latter seems to have been the case in ancient Lydia, circa 600 BCE. Of course, if you've listened to my other announcement episodes, you've heard this story before. The Lydian king Alyattes started producing electrum tokens for no clear purpose. Given the history of the material up to that point, they were probably just a show of royal favor, a little token piece of wealth from the king. People started trading them for that perceived value, and Alyattes' son, Croesus, formalized this with the production of gold and silver coinage, the first or second currency system in the world. Around the same time, in China, little golden tokens in the shape of shells, weapons, and tools were being produced and used in a similar way to Alyattes' electrum proto-coins. But it took longer for a Chinese government to step in and formalize that system in the same way as Croesus. Roughly at the same time, in India, they were hammering out the first Indian coins as well. Now I get to breeze over all of those other coinage mini-episodes I've already done. Silver wasn't nearly as rare or highly valued as gold, but it was still rare-ish and valuable. That meant that silver would always dominate currency systems alongside lesser precious metals like copper and bronze, but gold consistently remained a part of the economy. From the Lydian Cresid to the Persian Daric to the Greek stater, some denomination of gold coin usually held the highest value token in economies of pre-modern states. As trade spread further and further over the course of ancient and medieval history, the same basic premise became all but universal across Europe and Asia. However, thanks to their high value, gold coins were typically hard to come by, and not produced in huge quantities. That meant that large transactions still tended to be handled with smaller, less valuable denominations. This could be cumbersome, just by the sheer weight of all the metal involved, and vulnerable. More individual coins meant more opportunity for theft. Many of history's first experiments with banking and loans dealt with trying to solve that problem, usually in the form of some kind of agreement to acquire or transport the money separately from the actual purchase of goods. In the 7th century CE, Chinese merchants started issuing promissory notes to one another, basically a slip of paper saying, you can collect X amount of money from merchant Y by date Z. Initially, you'd exchange paper for goods, and the seller would take that note to collect their coinage later. But then, people started trading those notes back and forth until somebody actually needed physical coins. By the 11th century, this was formalized by the Song dynasty, who started issuing official government promissory notes to make up for a lack of minted coins during wartime. Basically, the government promising that they were going to mint more currency, but the minting process took too long and they needed to get that value circulating ahead of time. Partly influenced by this idea spreading along China's trade networks and later the Mongol Empire, similar ideas of promissory notes were not as common in the West, but they started appearing during the Crusades for similar reasons. And during the age of colonialism, the need to transport wealth across the ocean really spurred the development of European financial institutions, which would issue promissory notes that would then be traded back and forth as if they were the actual money itself. Eventually, European governments got involved in this process and started issuing official paper currency or paper promissory notes to the same effect. And these became the first government-issued banknotes. At this point, most colonial governments set the value of goods and currency in terms of silver. Gold was worth X amount of silver by weight. Coins were worth their silver content or the equivalent value in other materials. Government banknotes were redeemable for that stated value, either in silver or both silver and gold. In 1816, the United Kingdom started to shift toward a gold standard for their national accounting, and they rolled out similar standards across their colonies. By sheer force of the British Empire's size, other countries followed suit. So by the end of the 1800s, most of Europe, the Americas, and their various colonies issued paper money and coinage alike based on government-assessed value of gold, determined by how much was known to be in circulation, and backed up by the amount of gold that the government itself had in its reserves. This was the gold standard. The amount of new currency that could be issued into the economy was based on how much new gold entered a government stockpile the previous year. This meant a gold rush when new gold mines were discovered could cause rapid inflation, which usually led to governments requiring hard currency for their own business dealings to keep their own supply consistent with actual circulation value. Side note, in the United States, this was actually a state-level policy until 1862, when our federal government started to issue its own currency in order to fund the American Civil War. Up to that point, the US dollar was nominally a national currency, but issued by disjointed banking practices between the states or even sometimes between their counties, and it was comparatively unreliable. After the American Civil War, everything centralized around federally produced dollars. All of this makes sense on a basic level. Gold is valuable only because it's arbitrarily appealing. Always being valuable, barring a genuine apocalypse, made it a reliable store of wealth that could be exchanged for commodities. Gold is heavy, so we all started trading pieces of paper and keeping the physical gold at centralized locations until we actually needed the physical thing. This worked great, except for when it didn't. The early stirrings of globalization and the spread of gold standard economics in the 19th century made powerful governments reliant on consistent trends in the global gold market. When a ton of new gold entered the system in any one place, or left it, inflation spread between countries. Unscrupulous banks could fudge their numbers or speculate money that they didn't technically have on investments while claiming that they had more gold on hand than they really did. If the government needed more cash in circulation, they had to lower the legal value of gold to make up for it, and spend before the effects of that decision spread into other markets and brought the price of everything down. Or, in the other direction, raised everything up. This boiled over during and after the First World War. The gold standard made it difficult to raise taxes in an emergency and made economic catastrophe spread rapidly between countries because by then, near instant communication via radio and telegraph was now possible, so updates on economic situations elsewhere spread very quickly. Most of the European powers abandoned their gold standards in favor of fiat currency, money with an arbitrary value simply declared by the government. But the disorganized way they went about this was one of the contributing factors to the global Great Depression of the 1930s. So in 1934, the United States nationalized all the gold held by banks to get a handle on malpractice and gain greater control of how much money it could actually circulate. Effectively, this could end the gold standard for the United States as well, because the government had all the reserve gold and could set the price of that gold at whatever they wanted without any banks pushing back or trying to sell at different rates or anything like that. But technically, you could still, at that time, redeem US dollars for gold. And this shift in policy made the US dollar extremely stable during and after World War II, which led to many countries adopting the dollar in place of a gold standard after the war, effectively putting the bulk of the world on a dollar standard, and the dollar itself on a gold standard. Even that fell away over the next 30 years, and in the 1970s, the US did away with its own gold standard completely, opting for a fiat currency. Under modern fiat systems, currency is backed up entirely by the fact that we all just agree that the government issuing it is reliable, and that everyone around us will accept the local currency. Ironically, separating gold and money from one another really takes both concepts back to their roots. In the modern world, gold is valuable because it's a rare, pretty material that we all kind of like. Money is valuable because we all agree that it is. Sure, there are modern industrial applications for gold, but if that's all it was good for, we would not value it in the same way. At the end of the day, both our money and our shiny metals would be worthless if everyone didn't agree that we would keep using them. And yet, everyone just agrees that these things hold their value, and that is one of the driving forces of history, from the Varga necropolis to Cyrus conquering Lydia to the colonial empires and World War II. But, in the meantime, I, like everyone else, have been forced to agree that money is valuable. And my wife's wedding ring is broken, so I have to agree that gold is valuable too if I want to get that fixed. So, if you want bonus episodes, ad-free listening, Discord access, or more, go to hopfulmedia.com.co and subscribe today to support History of Persia and America's Secret Wars. Until next time, thank you all so much for listening.
The history of Persia is intertwined with conquest. It began with conquest when Cyrus, king of a small city called Anshan, set out to build the greatest empire the world had ever seen. In a series of stunning campaigns, he achieved just that, becoming one of the greatest conquerors in history, and basically started Persian history. After all, you don't get the title the Great for nothing. But he wouldn't be the last great Persian conqueror. Other Persian rulers like Darius the Great, Mithridates I, and Ardashir I would go on to become great conquerors on their own, establishing their own great empires and legacies. If you want to hear their story, and the stories of other great conquerors, many of whom are far less famous despite their great achievements, join me, Ramzi Shalah, on my podcast, The Conquerors Podcast, available on all platforms you listen through.
Hello and bonjour. My name is Josh Zucker, and I want to take you on a journey through some of the most exciting events of the late Middle Ages. Valois-Burgundy was one of the medieval world's greatest what-ifs. Its dukes inherited, conquered, and politicked their way into forging a state between the German Empire and the Kingdom of France that rivaled them both. From the 100 Years' War to the Holy Roman Empire, from urban workers to Joan of Arc, and from gallant knights to gunpowder weapons, the Grand Dukes of the West had a part to play in almost all of Western Europe's biggest developments in the 14th and 15th centuries. If you want to learn more about the glamorous rise and dramatic fall of the Dukes of Burgundy, please join me for Grand Dukes of the West, A History of Valois-Burgundy.